Pride and humility in the Alcoholics Anonymous program. The path of recovery in Alcoholics Anonymous is not only a process of stopping drinking, but a profound inner journey in which the alcoholic confronts the roots of their suffering and discovers new ways of living. In this journey, two forces emerge as central axes: pride and humility. Pride, disguised as self-sufficiency, denial, and resistance, has for years been a shield with which the person tries to protect themselves from their pain, but which in reality kept them trapped in self-destruction. On the other hand, humility appears as the key that opens the doors to spiritual freedom, reconciliation with oneself, and the possibility of a sober and fulfilling life. In Alcoholics Anonymous, speaking of pride is not limited to a personality trait. It is a force that fuels denial of the problem, prevents accepting help, and leads to repeating the same cycle of suffering. It is pride that makes the alcoholic believe they can control their drinking, that they do not need anyone, and that they have not caused significant harm. However, that same pride ends up isolating them, making them prisoners of their ego and the illusion of control. Humility, in contrast, is not understood as humiliation or as a renunciation of personal dignity, but as an act of radical honesty, admitting one's own powerlessness over alcohol, recognizing the consequences of one's actions, and opening oneself to the help of a higher power and the community. In this sense, humility is not weakness, but the true strength that allows one to begin again. The 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous are designed precisely to move the individual from a state of pride and illusory self-sufficiency toward an attitude of humility and openness. Each step, from admitting powerlessness to selfless service, becomes a concrete practice of humility that gradually dissolves the barriers of the ego and awakens a new life. In this way, the program teaches that recovery is not simply abstinence, but transformation. Only by renouncing the pride that blinds and accepting the humility that liberates can the alcoholic discover a path of sobriety, serenity, and authentic spiritual freedom. What do we understand by pride and humility in Alcoholics Anonymous? Pride is not only public vanity. In Alcoholics Anonymous, it often appears as denial, rationalization, and self-sufficiency. It is the inner voice that says, "I'm in control. It wasn't that bad. I don't need help." It protects the dependent identity of the alcoholic and avoids shame. It functions as an automatic defense. Humility. In Alcoholics Anonymous, it is understood as the honest willingness to see one's reality as it is, admit limitations, and open oneself to external support. It is not humiliation. It is practical realism and moral courage to change. It is the capacity to admit the truth and act accordingly. How does pride manifest in the alcoholic's behavior? Minimizing harm, justifying drinking episodes, resistance to asking for help, avoiding meetings, refusing a sponsor or therapy. Resentment and victimhood, interpreting everything as an attack and not accepting responsibility. Manipulation and control, attempting to hide or compensate for loss of control with lies or promises. Spiritual self-sufficiency, believing that personal willpower will be enough. These manifestations are not isolated moral failures. They are strategies the illness uses to survive. At first glance, pride is often confused with strength, self-sufficiency, or self-confidence. However, when looked at more deeply, especially in the realm of personal and spiritual recovery, it becomes clear that pride is often nothing more than a mask. Behind that armor, in the intimacy of the heart, beat fear and shame, powerful emotions that, unable to be recognized and accepted, hide beneath the appearance of arrogance or self-sufficiency. Fear is one of the deepest roots of pride, fear of being rejected, judged, showing vulnerability, or losing control. Pride then becomes a defense mechanism. If I appear confident, no one will notice my fragility. The alcoholic, for example, may cling to pride like a wall that protects them from admitting they are defeated, that they need help, or that their life has become unmanageable. That fear disguised as pride becomes a vicious cycle. The more they try to appear in control, the deeper they sink into powerlessness. On the other hand, shame also feeds pride. Unlike guilt, which relates to a specific action, shame touches identity. Not only did I do something bad, but I am bad. This deep wound leads to building masks so others do not discover the supposed unworthiness that lives inside. Pride, in this case, is a disguise that shouts, "Look at me strong! Look at me invincible! Look at me perfect!" While inside hides a self that feels small, insufficient, or unworthy of love. Both fear and shame have isolation in common. They push the person to distrust, to close their heart, and to protect themselves with a facade of pride that does not allow authentic closeness with others. In this way, pride, far from being a sign of power, becomes an emotional prison that prevents healing and growth. The way out begins with recognition, seeing that behind pride there is fear and shame. When the person dares to look directly at those roots and name them without judgment, they begin to dismantle the disguise. In the case of the Alcoholics Anonymous program, this task is facilitated through the practice of honesty in personal inventory, confession in an atmosphere of trust, and the experience of sharing with others who have gone through the same thing. There, fear dissolves in acceptance, and shame transforms into understanding and belonging. Pride loses strength when it is discovered that there is nothing to hide in order to be loved, and that vulnerability is not a condemnation, but a door to true freedom. By recognizing that fear and shame have been the hidden roots, the individual can begin to live with greater authenticity, humility, and serenity. Ultimately, pride is nothing more than a disguise that protects unhealed wounds. When those roots are illuminated with the light of awareness and embraced with compassion, pride ceases to be necessary, and the person reconciles with their own fragility. Only then can genuine humility flourish, not imposed, but born from truth and acceptance of who we are. The price of pride in recovery. When pride dominates, the alcoholic interrupts program processes, does not work the steps, does not apologize, maintains resentments that facilitate relapse, breaks important relationships, family, work, community, and deprives themselves of effective help, sponsorship, service, and group support. In short, pride slows recovery and deepens the loneliness that feeds drinking. What is humility not? In the Alcoholics Anonymous program, humility occupies a central place. It is the foundation of recognizing powerlessness over alcohol, the engine that drives change, and the attitude that opens the heart to the help of a higher power and the community. However, it is often confused with attitudes that are not truly humble, but distortions that can hinder spiritual growth and recovery. Understanding what humility is not is essential to avoid falling into traps that perpetuate the ego under more subtle disguises. Number 1. Humility is not humiliation. Humility in Alcoholics. Anonymous does not mean lowering oneself or accepting mistreatment or contempt. Humiliation destroys dignity, while humility strengthens it. A member who lives humbly recognizes themselves as valuable and worthy, though limited. True humility does not ask one to bow their head before abuse or carry unnecessary guilt, but rather to accept with serenity the truth of one's own condition. Number 2. Humility is not self-erasure. Many confuse humility with erasing themselves, as if having no voice or opinion, or living in a state of constant submission. This false humility is dangerous, because it deprives the individual of identity, and turns them into someone who seeks approval at the cost of authenticity. In Alcoholics Anonymous, humility implies being honest about what one thinks and feels, and putting it in service of growth, not remaining silent out of fear, nor submitting without discernment. Number 3. Humility is not false modesty. Another common trap is false modesty, minimizing achievements, denying talents, or wasting qualities to appear humble. This disguise does not free the ego. It feeds it from the shadows, as it expects recognition or validation. Instead, genuine humility recognizes the gifts received, is grateful for them, and uses them for the good of others, without boasting or denial. Number 4. Humility is not passivity. Living with humility does not mean standing idly by or accepting things as they are without acting. It is not saying, "That's just how I am," to justify mistakes, or "I can't change" as an excuse. Humility in Alcoholics. Anonymous is dynamic. It drives one to work on defects, repair damage, ask for help, and serve others. It is movement toward transformation, not passive resignation. Number 5. Humility is not spiritual perfectionism. Some, in their desire to grow, fall into spiritual pride disguised as humility. They believe they must always appear exemplary, without errors or doubts. But humility does not demand perfection. On the contrary, it admits imperfection and opens itself to learning. Pretending to follow an unforgiving model can be another form of hidden pride. Perhaps one of the most widespread confusions is thinking that humility is synonymous with weakness, fragility, or inability to defend oneself. In reality, humility is one of the greatest forms of strength. The ability to accept the truth, to ask for forgiveness, to serve without expecting recognition, and to walk with dignity in the midst of one's own vulnerability. Program tools that cultivate humility. Alcoholics Anonymous provides concrete practices to transform pride into humility. Step 1. Admission. Recognizing powerlessness over alcohol. That admission breaks the illusion of control. Step 4. Moral inventory. Looking at defects without justifying or exaggerating. Steps 8 and 9. Amends. Repairing the damage. A practical action of humility. Step 7. Humbly asking to be freed from defects. It is a prayer of active surrender. Sponsorship and meetings. The community corrects, supports, and demonstrates practical humility through testimonies and service. Service. Helping others reduces the ego and puts life into action. Practical exercises to cultivate humility, daily and concrete. Number 1. Admit at the beginning of the day, "I am powerless over alcohol today." A brief affirmation that guides behavior. Number 2. Nightly inventory. 10 to 15 minutes to review the day's mistakes without judging oneself. Number 3. Small acts of service. Tending the coffee station, welcoming a newcomer, writing to a fellow member. Number 4. Ask for explicit help. Call the sponsor before deciding something risky. Number 5. Make a symbolic amends. Begin with a sincere apology where possible. Number 6. Practice gratitude. List 3 things you are grateful for. Number 7. Meditation or daily reading of Alcoholics Anonymous literature to cultivate spiritual perspective. Number 8. Accept feedback. When someone points out a mistake, thank them and do not become defensive. These exercises transform humility into habit, humility and spirituality, openness to a higher power. The alcoholic often lives under the illusion of control, thinking they can manage their drinking, their impulses, their relationships, even though reality shows otherwise. That false security feeds denial and prolongs suffering. Humility, on the other hand, invites one to honestly face personal powerlessness before alcohol and admit that alone they cannot overcome it. This recognition does not degrade the individual. On the contrary, it frees them. Only by accepting the truth of one's limits does the human being open space for something greater than themselves. Spirituality in Alcoholics Anonymous is not limited to a dogma or a specific religion. It speaks of a higher power, understood as that loving, wise, and transcendent force that each person defines according to their own understanding. Humility prepares the heart to open to that mystery, to trust that not everything depends on personal will, and that there is a broader energy that can sustain and guide life. Arrogance blocks this experience, insisting that everything must be resolved from the self. Humility, on the other hand, dares to let go, to trust, to say simply, "I can't do this alone. I need help." Spirituality in Alcoholics Anonymous is lived through concrete practices: prayer, meditation, sharing in groups, service to others, and the constant search for a spiritual awakening. Without humility, these practices risk becoming empty rituals or stages for spiritual pride. True humility makes prayer not a monologue, but a sincere dialogue with this higher power. It makes meditation not an exercise in self-deception, but a space for deep listening. It makes service not a means of recognition, but a selfless offering. The Alcoholics Anonymous program proposes a path of steps that requires consistency and patience. Without humility, impatience and ego can sabotage the process, as the alcoholic may want immediate results or deny the need to follow certain recommendations. Humility teaches trust in time, acceptance that spiritual growth is gradual, and that the higher power often works in imperceptible ways. Humility then becomes the foundation of a practical faith, trusting what cannot be seen, what cannot be fully controlled, but is experienced as real and transformative. When a person opens themselves humbly to a higher power, they begin to experience profound changes. Anxiety decreases, resentments soften, fear loses strength, and a new capacity emerges to live in peace, to forgive, and to be grateful. This transformation is not a personal achievement, but a spiritual gift received by allowing the grace of that higher power to enter. The alcoholic who once lived trapped in isolation and self-sufficiency now discovers the beauty of interdependence. Needing God, or however one conceives him, and others, is not weakness, but a source of strength,